with, sorry, in partnership with the MarENet project, which is the Atlantic Maritime Ecosystem Network project, and our colleagues at MTU and the IMDO, Irish Maritime Development Office. Thanks in particular to Dr. John Hobbs of MTU for inviting our cluster to develop this event. In addition, Energy Cork hosted events would not be possible without the ongoing support of Cork County Council and Cork City Council through their respective economic development funds and the continued help of Cork Chamber. I suppose to start, maybe a couple of items of housekeeping. It should be already done by default, but please keep your microphones on mute for the duration of the event. We'll have a short Q&A session following the presentations. Please use the chat function to ask any questions you might have. Excuse me. This event is being recorded and will be shared online afterwards. So getting to the topic at hand, the EU Green Deal amounts to a roadmap centered on resource efficiency, circularity and environmental protection to create the conditions for Europe to collectively assume global leadership in achieving climate neutrality by 2050, while doing so in a socially fair manner. The question is, excuse me, the question is, what does this mean for regions like Cork, for companies, including SMEs working in the space, and how will EU citizens begin to experience the benefits of the EU Green Deal? To begin to explore this, we're delighted to have two excellent speakers today to give us their take on the EU Green Deal. Ronan Gingles, European Affairs Coordinator at Cork City Council. Sonia Monteiro, Research Grants Coordinator at the Environmental Research Institute, UCC. And to set the scene for our speakers and to introduce us all to the MarENet project, I'd like to introduce Dr. Paul Brewster, European Policy Advisor at the Irish Maritime Development Office. Over to you, Paul.
Oh, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. I'll just get my slides up. Very good. So we have everything there. So yes, I said good afternoon again. I'm looking forward to hearing more from our experts later on the EU Green Deal. And I suppose from our point of view, we're here to focus very much on the maritime and energy perspectives of it. So I suppose I work for the Irish Maritime Development Office. For those of you that don't know us that well, the IMDO reports to the Minister of Transport. We're part of the Marine Institute that obviously report to the Department of Agriculture, Food and Marine. But essentially those two departments cover a lot of the areas relevant to maritime and our ocean economy as a whole in Ireland. Our role is across a number of areas. We advise the Minister and the Department in relation to policy issues and economic analysis. But then we have a business development mandate, both to support ports, shipping, maritime sector, the wider maritime sector nationally, and then internationally to try and attract businesses and encourage businesses to come and do maritime business in Ireland. And I suppose as part of that, their skills is crucial, as we know, for the development of our blue economy and our maritime industries. And we got involved as a partner along with John and the team at MTU on the MarENet project, which is a network of training centres and industry bodies like the IMDO for the maritime sector in the Atlantic. And I suppose it has a number of aims. It's obviously looking to strengthen cooperation between industry and training centres and academia, and at the same time fulfilling the skills needs primarily that are there in established industries and indeed in new industries like offshore renewable energy and aquaculture, and areas that are going to be a growing part of our blue economy going forward. And in all of this, we're trying to highlight and promote the attractiveness of blue careers, that we have a lot of highly skilled, highly educated people here and across the Atlantic, and we want to try and encourage them to join the maritime sector as a whole. And I suppose the work has involved strategic studies, developing and implementing training courses like today's and a number of entrepreneurship initiatives. And there's a lot more details on the website to find out what we're doing in this area. So obviously a lot of these are related or heavily related to the EU Green Deal. And I think as was mentioned at the start, you know, that policy direction, or in our maritime language, we'll say that ship has sailed or is very much sailing, that, you know, Europe has set out its stall to be a prosperous, modern, climate neutral economy. And that has huge implications for all sectors, as we know. And interestingly, you know, our maritime sector will be at the heart of that. We know and are seeing, I'll highlight a number of areas where this is particularly relevant and where skills and skills development will be crucially important. The area of green ports have always been nodes for energy, for food, for trade, and our ports of the future will continue to be nodes for fuels, but alternative fuels, new fuels like hydrogen, and other biofuels that will help our whole transport system decarbonize. But also a big part of the Green Deal and very much a part of sort of port activities will be around the logistics and digitalization agenda. So if we can make transport flows more seamless, more efficient, then we know that will have significant repercussions for what we're trying to achieve with the Green Deal. And the other area that we're seeing lots of development in our ports, where in the past, you know, we will have master plans for building infrastructure and dealing with the sort of volumes of trade that pass through our ports. But we're now seeing the impetus for a green master plan, which is driving this towards a more sustainable, lower carbon sort of future for these ports activities. Another area where the Commission and indeed through the new Horizon Europe framework is the ambitions for zero emission shipping. Obviously for Ireland in particular, over 90% of our trade goes through our ports. So lower emission shipping is going to benefit us and the wider European economy and elsewhere. So there's obviously significant development and R&D and investment required to do this. But Horizon Europe is very much to the fore of that, with a new partnership that is due to be launched very soon. And again, the ambitions that have been set out there are significant and will require lots of expertise from lots of sectors, even those that maybe aren't traditionally associated with the maritime sector. You know, when we talk about shipbuilding and creating vessels of the future, you know, the digitalization, the ICT systems, the new engines, the technologies involved nowadays, you know, are hardly recognizable from shipbuilding in the past. So huge opportunities in that sector as well. And the final point then to make is ports as hubs for wider industries, and this is very evident in the ambitions for offshore renewable energy that Europe has set out. Their new offshore renewable energy strategy sets some enormous ambitions around accessing offshore wind, wave and tidal from our oceans and seas around our coast. And Ireland is particularly well placed to do this. And we see a huge opportunity in that area and other areas for us to develop. And I suppose just to bring it back to the skills context, that we are going to need lots of really capable people to deliver these ambitions, and looking forward to hearing from our speakers on the areas of the Green Deal of where we can help develop those skills and where those opportunities will arise.
That's great. Thanks, Paul. Really informative stuff. Fantastic. Right, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Ronan Gingles, European Affairs Coordinator at Cork City Council. Over to you, Ronan. Thank you.
Thank you, Harry. Can you see that? You have my slide?
We do, Ronan, yeah.
Very good. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to speak to you. Quick advertisement. EU Affairs Coordinator with City Council, and my role is basically to inform and facilitate our access to and to maximize the quality of our engagement with European opportunities, be that funding or otherwise, and do so in a whole of organization sense that contributes to realizing the objectives Cork has to develop as a world-class city in terms of its future-proofing, its sustainability, its resilience, its competitiveness, its inclusiveness, ideally all of the above. So my role is to be a focal point and to try and identify and size up prospects, to make connections externally, to foster a bit of interest internally with the right people, to join up approaches, to demystify Europe, which I'll try to do today a little bit, to advise and interpret, and to aid our application development to get involved in European affairs, and then try and keep track of the whole thing. The slide is not advancing for me. There we go. Okay, just needs a bang. So this is our portfolio, if you will, in all its technicolor glory of our endeavors in Europe over the last couple of years. To the left, some heavy investments programmed under the structural funds. In the main to the right, a couple of networks we're involved in with other regions and cities to tee up opportunities. And in the center, a plethora of transnational projects with partners elsewhere in Europe, which have been competed for and won, representing an array of activity, various teams right across the board, all shapes and sizes and extensive involvement, most of them as full partners with project management requirements. Some very recently concluded, but 2/3 of them ongoing, and 9, I think, or 10 of them only underway in the last 12 years as we head to the tail end of the 2014-2020 program period. So it's a conveyor belt of opportunities to keep going, and we access funding for most of them, but that's only really as an enabler to allow activities that wouldn't otherwise be financeable to take place on the ground, mainly small scale actions. It's really all about the learning and the opportunities to broaden the horizons as a city and try and investigate and demonstrate whether alternative approaches would fly in Cork and whether we can make our mark on Europe as a consequence as well. And in terms of green projects, we have some on urban development, investments like the Mary Elms Bridge and Marina Park, which they're badged as green. Obviously a park is green, a bridge mightn't seem as much, but it's tied in with sustainable mobility moves increasingly in a post-COVID world. And then we have others on sustainable growth, informing brownfield development using nature-based solutions, or attempts to grow the city in a more sustainable fashion through the Intelligent Cities Challenge program, which includes a strong focus on scaling up renewable energy solutions and energy efficiency. We have a raft of projects on housing maintenance, which look at integration of energy into the mix. We also have projects on community awareness and engagement with climate action, some of which have only been approved in recent weeks. And it would be remiss of me not to mention the Fire Spell project, given that Kieran Latisse is himself our man involved in that, and that looks at renewable energy sources and investigating how to look towards future development of grant systems, as well as a regional action plan tied in with the structural funds for the southern region in the future. And aside from projects, we are, and this is jumping the horse a little, last autumn we subscribed through the Lord Mayor through a network we're involved in called ICLE for Local Governance and Sustainability. We joined what's called the Mannheim Message, which is a campaign to impress on the EU institutions that the EU Green Deal, if it's going to take flight, needs to have a local delivery role among communities and citizens and local government. And this is part of an effort by City Council to maneuver ourselves into the vanguard of more sustainably minded cities. And we've signed up previously to the Aalborg Charter on Urban Sustainability, for example, the Basque Declaration on New Pathways for Sustainable and Resilient Cities, and the Covenant of Mayors on local climate and energy policy in line with the EU targets for the 2030 mitigation and adaptation. So there's a lot of continuity about this. So back to start, what is the Green Deal? Spoiler alert, before I go any further, you may have heard, it's about the ambition to transition to net zero emissions in a carbon neutral Europe by 2050. But it's very differently defined, almost carelessly defined, I would say, including in the media, but also if you're to go on any official sources. It's a flagship policy framework, one of 5 for the current European Commission, but the dominant one. It's a guiding consideration for how EU expenditure will take place over the next 7 years. It's not a fund in itself, I hasten to add, hence that point about how things are badged in a green way, in a very all-encompassing way. It's a monumental shift in what the EU is all about. As Harry said, it's also a growth strategy, a long-term growth strategy, an agenda for sustainable growth, a roadmap for far-reaching reforms. It's been called a paradigm shift in how we do economic development and a blueprint for green transition of society in a just and inclusive manner. A major transformation and a modernization of key elements of the economy, and a means to make the European economic recovery, originally from the economic crisis, but now also in the post-COVID sense, sustainable and inclusive. It's a new Marshall Plan, in effect, the largest investment in the history of Europe since the Second World War, and it's been called akin to the Industrial Revolution, a revolution in cleaner and greener economies. Sometimes it's called a climate law, but that's a bit restrictive in that it's just one area that really refers to. So it's a bit like Winston Churchill's riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma description of Russia. All in all this is true, and it's all happening to a certain extent with a certain amount of wind in its sails at this stage, and the penny is starting to drop as to what it will mean in real terms. One way or another, it's going to be hugely influential, highly impactful, very cross-cutting. So to labor the metaphor, it's basically the elephant in the room. So the intended destination, which are greener pastures, if you will, is quite clear, but the substance of the journey and who's actually driving, and what fuel they're using and what speed they're going to be doing is not. That's all falling into place. We're talking about a massive issue, or a series of massive issues, really, an umbrella, because there's a green aspect to almost every policy now, or if there isn't, it's increasingly being crowbarred, shoehorned in there. The Green Deal has many moving parts, many players. Its policy structure has huge overlaps between the constituent parts. It's hard to tell where one element ends and another one begins, a real maze. It's also a work in progress, and its state of play is difficult to nail down in really concrete terms, a bit like picking up mercury with a fork, if you will. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish the proposal stage from the Commission with how the progress and the modifications with the other European institutions have gone in the meantime. And this is especially true with the financial aspect. So I'm going to try to unpack something that's quite conceptual, make it as relatable and practical as possible. I'm going to do this quite broadly, rather than in purely energy or blue economy terms, to try and just give you a sense of the thing in the round in terms of context, motivations, challenges, themes, the actions, and the financial side from a European perspective. If there's any time afterwards, I'd be happy to look at what this could mean from an Irish point of view, but we'll see how that goes on. You will have some slides. How we got here, the motivations, this came about at a time of amazing complexity and change in the world and in Europe. Climate and biodiversity crisis, geopolitics, shifting tectonic plates, if you will, changing demographics, and a digital industrial revolution that's highly disruptive. Environmental concerns coming center stage with a lot of droughts, fires, storms, and melting ice caps. And really there was a feeling that this needed to be put at the heart of EU policy making, and that was even pre-COVID. So it's been really a combination of the incontrovertible scientific evidence about increasing intensity and frequency of climate change and the need for drastic abatement measures before it's too late to stave off really severe and irreversible consequences for natural ecosystems. The trends, those are quite clear. It's also evident enough that progress that's been made has over the last 20, 30 years has started to slow down in terms of reducing emissions, in terms of improving waste generation performance and energy efficiency. So we're going in the right direction, but more slowly than we were. So there's a need to really get back on the horse, I suppose, and speed up the scale of the transition in key systems. There's also a need for a very multifaceted approach across the board. There's an economic imperative as well, including that there are direct economic impacts from things like water shortages, which hinder everything from agriculture to tourism. Excuse me. And we know now, after the last 3 decades, that the economy has continued by and large to boom, even with efforts in place in terms of the mitigation of greenhouse emissions. So climate action is compatible with a productive economy. So an economic reset was in order and possible. Finally, there's the moral imperative of protecting people and the planet as well as prosperity. And I think from a developed world, this is fairly obvious that Europe felt it had a need to show a sense of leadership and example. With apologies to Sam Bennett in the Maillot Vert there, this, however, is a marathon, not a sprint. The EU is increasingly looking to exert itself externally and internationally to play a global power role, realizing that the G20 economies are responsible for 3/4 of the greenhouse gas emissions globally. Europe is, through this move, Europe is the only major bloc or economy in the world to have put in place ambitions of this vein on a legislative footing. So a united European front is also a critical factor ahead of COP26 in Glasgow in November. Europe will set out a collective, as it's termed, national determined contribution, continental though it is, to carbon cutting efforts. And we'll put pressure on the likes of China, Japan, both of which have longer term, I suppose, cutoff dates for their climate neutrality. And also a United States is returning to the fold in the Biden administration to do more to boost their climate pledges and maybe hopefully bring India into play as well. So this is all worked through the European Council. Less idealistically, Europe is looking to use leverage, I suppose, its place at the center of global travel and trade and aviation, to set aviation and shipping standards that go beyond its borders, new emissions reporting rules on vessels, a reform of the emissions trading system, review of aviation taxes and so on. That's all quite technical. There's also a feeling that Europe might fall behind in terms of the green technology shift in areas, as happened with solar power, with electric vehicles, with wind power. So there's a need to invest in cutting edge research and innovation. But there's a danger that the rest of the world won't follow. And there are also a sense of contradictions within European trade policy. Defining the Green Deal is, as I say, it's not easy. It's a brief enough document of 24 pages when published. Quote unquote, a growth strategy to transform the EU into a fair and prosperous society with a modern, resource efficient and competitive economy where there are no net emissions or greenhouse gases in 2050 and where economic growth is decoupled from resource use. So that's as official an explanation as I can give. It's also a stepped transition to net zero with an interim 2030 reduction of 55% on the 1990 baseline for emissions. So that goes up from the 40% as agreed for the Paris Agreement. Encouragingly enough, the Commission claims that we're on course for 45% as it stands. Then again, the European Parliament was pushing for 60% as the 2030 target. But politics, I suppose, is the art of compromise and the possible. But it's still an ambitious target, which is going to need goals, interconnected goals right across society and the economy, decoupling growth, as I say, and consumption, moving to a circular economy, increasing recycling, reducing waste, preventing biodiversity loss and deforestation, and overhauling agriculture and the way transport is powered with electrification in mind. So this is going to need really radical restructuring of policies to tackle root causes of carbon emissions. Annexed to this policy communication was an action plan containing a set of more than 50 proposals from the Commission on investment needs and financial resources that will help to deliver them. And since the announcement, these have started to be rolled out quite speedily, given the pandemic, by the Commission in terms of new regulations and plans and changes to EU law over the course of 2020 and 2021. So there are 8 policy themes. I'm going to just go through them. The first 2 in particular, particularly significant, I think. The first, I've already mentioned climate action, but this is where it all sort of hangs on, and it's the most wide-ranging and overlapping of the 8. The centerpiece is a so-called climate law. The Commission has proposed to a legally binding target and commitment on climate neutrality, which would be applicable to the member states as well, who'd have to then take the necessary measures to deliver this by the 2050 cutoff point. This is a net target, which will rely heavily on carbon sinks from land use and forestry, as well as actual inroads into decarbonisation. So the climate law sets a direction of travel for policies in a socially fair and cost-efficient manner, and establishes a long-term framework as well as governance arrangements for its delivery, its monitoring and its review, and further action if needed, which should in theory provide a bit of predictability for investors and economic actors and ensure that the transition is irreversible. Already we've had last year a methane strategy separate to that, by reference to energy, agriculture and waste sectors, and quite in February a new, more ambitious EU strategy on adapting to climate change, focused a lot on resilience, improving knowledge, stepping up adaptation planning, risk assessments, and accelerated adaptation action came through, and that'll go to the Commission this month, I believe. And coming up next month, that 55% interim target will be fleshed out a little with a package of measures called Fit for 55, which is germane also to the energy pillar, but I'll deal with it here, in that it'll deal with the emissions trading system reform, a new renewables directive, new energy efficiency directive, alternative fuels, infrastructure deployment legislation, and other regulation, I think possibly a directive on carbon emissions from vehicles, as well as a piece on the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which seeks to, I suppose, ring fence Europe from unfair competition from less green parts of the world where lower standards of production are applied. Before I leave climate, it's important to say that this isn't Europe in its ivory tower handing down a message. It's meant to be a shared ambition between member states and Parliament, member states being the more difficult of the two, which the Commission facilitates. And therefore, as with anything Europe delivers, there's a need for cohesive approaches, including European initiatives and synergies with national programs. Not all European member states are starting from the same point. Certain regions are a lot more reliant on fossil fuels, and there are varying concerns about energy security and job security, which very often trump environmental considerations. So the burden sharing is a sensitive matter among member states. The skeptics would include Poland, the Czech Republic, and Bulgaria, where coal-dependent economies are still very much the norm. And this is the problem, that member states will be the biggest hindrance, I suppose, to the Green Deal progressing. The December 2020 European Council brought these countries on board. It agreed a pathway forward, and agreement has since been struck with the European Parliament, which in fact goes a bit further again in terms of committing to set targets, interim targets for 2040 as well as 2030. We'll see how that comes out, as well as a commitment to negative emissions after 2050. So better again. But in the meantime, Poland has started to throw a spanner in the works, backtracking a little and saying that proposals in relation to new carbon pricing systems for road transport and heating for buildings are unfair and that they disadvantage Eastern and Southern Europe. This is really a play about the European budget divvy up. Poland's already the biggest beneficiary, but is obviously marking other people's cards about the future, and hopefully all this will come out in the wash rather than imperiling where we're at. And the second pillar to look at here in a little detail is energy, decarbonising a sector whose production and usage accounts for more than 3/4 of European GHGs. The intention is to create a fully integrated, interconnected, digitized European energy market, ensuring security, affordability, and cleanliness of supply, promoting and integrating renewables into the mix, using smart grids, smart integration, power-to-X technologies to convert renewables into hydrogen, for example, and other storage solutions such as batteries, and overall better sector integration. And this needs to take place at as low possible a cost while ensuring circularity, while also tackling the thorny issue of energy poverty for households who mightn't necessarily be able to afford this. So we've seen already a strategy for energy system integration, paving the way towards a more integrated approach, breaking down fragmented energy consumption value chains, infrastructures, rules, planning and operation between the different silos of, say, transport, industry, buildings, gas, to try and drive better cost effectiveness and technological progress in the future towards a system where, for example, offshore wind energy will be stored as clean hydrogen used to heat buildings. We've also had the hydrogen strategy last summer to address how to take the potential of this technology forward to power sectors, particularly those not suitable for electrification, providing different storage solutions to balance variable renewable energy flows, aiding investment regulation, market development, and research and innovation. And this will be mainly to develop renewable hydrogen in the long term using wind and solar, but in the short term, other forms of low carbon hydrogen to try and rapidly reduce emissions and support development of a viable market. And we've also, in the last winter, we had the offshore renewable energy strategy to try and ramp up, to massively ramp up gigawatt capacity from currently 12 to something in the region of 300 gigawatts by 2050. There's also been some developments on the battery front in relation to the economic, social, and environmental issues related to batteries. So I won't labor the points of the other pillars, but you can look into them. They deal with circularity, with buildings and renovation, with smart and sustainable mobility, with food, which is essentially a greening of the Common Agricultural Policy, with biodiversity and ecosystems, and with zero pollution. And just to go back there, to note in relation to MarENet, and it's really not clear where it goes in the mix, but there is they brought out a replacement for the Blue Growth Communication just last month in terms of developing a new blue economy, which looks at it in the topic in the round in relation to pollution, circularity, biodiversity, ecosystems, resilience, food, and also marine spatial planning. So that's certainly one to look out for. 1 year in, progress has been distinctly uneven to judge by this independent think tank barometer, but it's thought that the best progress has been made in relation to climate and energy, whereas the least has been in relation to ecosystems. zero pollution, food systems, and to a degree circularity, though that is stressed to be an area of massive opportunity. And then there are other, aside from that, there are smaller sidebars, if you will, cross-cutting measures, a climate pact to try and address citizen engagement. There will be a lot of support measures developed by the Commission, but we're waiting to see the colour of their money there. But this is part of the human focus of the deal, as is the commitment that nobody be left behind, which you'll have heard of in terms of the concept of just transition, part of which is applied in funding terms at this moment in time to future programs for the Midlands and for the as a energy intensive region, but we haven't really looked at it with Cork in mind. Then there's also great scope in terms of research and innovation. Sonia, coming up shortly, will talk about the Horizon Europe program. Yeah, there's a lot to take in there in terms of research and innovation. We might come back to that later. And COVID, it's important to realize that this was all put through in the before time. COVID hasn't reduced any investment needs. It's reduced the capacity of households and businesses to invest in green solutions, I suppose, or options. But the Green Deal is going to be a huge component in Europe's economic recovery from the pandemic. And that's why the budget has been framed, and I'll only just overview this as a recovery budget for the next 7 years, being greener, digital, and resilient. This is very big picture stuff, and I'm not going to go into it, but it's important to bear in mind there's a 30% commitment of a 1.7 trillion package, which comes in two parts, sorry, 1.8 trillion package, which comes in two parts. A 30% commitment for green activity or European Green Deal focused activities. Sorry, jumping the gun just a little there. So there's your classic European budget for 7 years, which includes programs such as the CAP, Horizon Europe, the LIFE program, cohesion funding programs, and others. A quarter of that will go towards climate action and environment. And you also have the unexpected bonus recovery element, which is called Next Gen EU, which has an even higher amount towards green elements, and is embodied in the Recovery and Resilience Facility you might have heard of recently, which has a climate stroke digital transition focus. And Ireland's programme was revealed late last month, which is strongly focused on advancing green transition, accelerating digital reforms and transition, and social and economic recovery and job creation. And again, I can look at that if anyone has a need to. And then the final piece, there maybe isn't time, Kieran, to go into this. I suppose I should pass to Sonia. The slides are there. Investment. There's not enough finance in the European budget to deliver on all these needs. There's a need to tap into significant financial support from elsewhere with upfront investments to switch to energy and clean tech in industry and in transport. So, and it's particularly, this needs to be done particularly in advance of 2030. So what's called the Sustainable Europe Investment Plan, which is basically the Green Deal investment plan, again, not a fund, has been drawn up with a view to mobilizing 1 trillion by 2030 in private or national investment. So using parts of the EU budget and leveraging further thereafter. And a quarter of that will have a green tint. And if you've ever heard of the Juncker plan or the investment plan for Europe, that's now called InvestEU, and it backbones the SEIP to boost investment, innovation, and job creation in terms of sustainability, research, innovation, digitalization, small businesses, and social investment. So this will use guarantee funds from the EIB to trigger significant spending, as well as an advisory hub and a portal to try and develop the pipeline of projects. So there's slides there in relation to Ireland. I'm not going to deal with them, certainly not right now, but just to conclude, from my point of view, I would say the Green Deal is not perfect, but it's well worth doing. It has a lot of win-win about it. It's going in the right direction, particularly since COVID. It just needs fleshing out in terms of the detail, and that's a hell of a job, and to match the rhetoric with action, which in turn will need leadership and buy-in and governance at all levels, and investment in order to make it happen. There are some policy inconsistencies we have to be aware of. There's a massive danger of dilution and of backsliding at all levels, from Europe to the national, and even how it's just viewed among the general population. But I would be, I suppose, cautiously optimistic about the direction of where it's all going. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ronan. An incredibly thorough overview of the Green Deal and what it entails. Look, without further ado, we'll hand over to Sonia Monteiro, who is the Research Grants Coordinator at the Environmental Research Institute, UCC. Over to you, Sonia.
Okay, I'll get my presentation up. Can you see my slides?
We can.
Cool. So, like Harry said, my name is Sonia. Kind of like Ronan, my job is basically providing research support to academics and researchers within the Environmental Research Institute at UCC. So my job is basically they come to me with ideas for projects, and I have to go out and find funding opportunities for them and then help them apply for those funding opportunities. So following on, just to give you an idea for those that don't know what the ERI is, we're one of the flagship institutes within UCC. We include, under the ERI banner, there are 4 research centers, and we have academics from 20 different departments and schools from across the 4 colleges within the university. So social sciences, engineering, ecology, biology, chemistry. We have academics from across the board. We have about 400 researchers, including about 100 principal investigators. And we do research in all areas that relate to environmental research, from stuff to do with climate action. We have a big push on circular economy at the moment. We have expertise in marine renewables. The MarENet SFI Center falls under the banner of the ERI. So we cover a wide range of expertise in terms of environmental research that's done within UCC. Following on from what Ronan was saying, the Green Deal is supposed to make Europeans' lives better and make Europe a leading star in terms of research and innovation, and in terms of protecting the environment and delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. So Horizon Europe is one of the financial aspects that will help Europe deliver on the EU Green Deal, in terms of science, in terms of improving society, and in terms of boosting the economy and sort of improving and developing economy and keeping Europe at the cutting edge of both research and innovation. So this is just to give you an idea of the division. So Horizon Europe is the biggest framework program ever for Europe. More than half of the money for the next 7 years is going to address global challenges and improve in European industrial competitiveness. There is money for what they call Innovative Europe, which is bringing up innovative SMEs and industry, and Excellent Science, which is the area that's more focused for academia, which is sort of the blue skies, bottom up type of research. So this is just the structure of Horizon Europe is similar to what the structure of Horizon 2020 was. So there's 3 pillars. Pillar one is excellent science. So this is sort of the capacity building aspect to it, the training. This is more target, even though industry can be involved, especially in the Marie Curie actions, it is sort of more targeted at academia, and it's bottom up in the sense that it's the consortia or the researchers that decide what they want to do and how they want to do it. Pillar two looks at the different global challenges that have been identified as critical to be addressed in the next 7 years. So you have health, security, energy, climate, food, the bioeconomy, sort of in the blue economy, falls mostly under clusters 5 and 6. So the climate and the food and bioeconomy. And then you have pillar 3, which is the innovative Europe pillar, and this is more targeted at industry and SMEs, where you have the European Innovation Council, which has lots of funding opportunities for innovative SMEs and industry, and projects in under this pillar tend to be led by industry rather than academia. So in terms of pillar 2, which is the biggest one in terms of money targeted towards it, there's different, this is just to give you an idea of the areas of intervention for each cluster. For most of you, the most relevant ones are probably the climate, so cluster 5 and 6, climate, energy, and mobility, and food, economy, natural resources, and because that's where most of the blue economy, biofuels, new forms of energy, that's where most of the calls are going to be. And in these projects, industry can be involved, they can be consortium members, they can be fully involved. Depending on what sort of project you're going for, you can get 100% of your funding. If it's an innovation action, which is something that's a little bit closer to market, then funding for industry is 70%, but it's still, there's a lot of money and there's a lot of opportunities available for anyone that wants to get involved. The first calls, so the work for these, there's an annual work program that's released by the Commission. We just got notified a couple of days ago that the first calls are going to open at the end of this month on June 22nd. So the first deadlines for the clusters will be in October. So for the food for cluster 5 and 6, the first deadlines will come in October, November. And if anyone wants more information about that, just let me know. I can give you more about that. Then you have pillar 3, which, like I said, is more focused on developing industry and keeping European industry at the cutting edge of research. These are just a few. So the idea is that they want to sort of, like you can see here for the EIC, 70% of the budget is earmarked for SMEs. These are sort of the SMEs that need that little bit of extra help to go from being innovative at a national level to being innovative at a European or a global level. It's very innovation centric. It's about sort of cutting risk, helping SMEs move and take the next step. There are different funding streams. Some of these are open already. So there's different ones depending on what size of company you're talking about, what type of project you're talking about. And I think the slides are going to be made available. So these links are all live and you can check, you can see, follow up and check what the calls are and the details of each of the funding opportunities. Just to give you an idea, it's not just European. Horizon Europe is going to be around for the next 7 years, but there are other funding streams that might be relevant to you. And these go through Eureka, the Eurostars, the JTIs. You can go through Enterprise Ireland for these. So it's just, there are other opportunities. There will be other opportunities with the Interreg projects as well, programs as well, but those won't be defined before the end of this year. So I didn't want to, we don't know exactly what the priorities are going to be for most of them yet, because they're still in the process of deciding their next strategies for the next 7 years. And these are just general networks and links to give you, so you can access, you don't have to go searching for stuff. We have a very good national support network. So each of the clusters and each of the Horizon Europe programs has a national contact point. The network is led by Enterprise Ireland, but for instance, the environmental ones are based in the EPA, the climate action ones are based in the EPA. The ICT are based in Enterprise Ireland. There's two specific ones to provide support for SME, and they can help you find partners. They can help you find academic partners, even within Ireland, if you need someone to work with or you need expertise internally. And they're really very approachable, and they're always keen to help Irish institutions, be it SMEs, industry, or academia, to go for European funding. And that's it. Just not scare anyone.
That's great, Sonia. Thank you very much. That was a sprint, shall we say? Very good.
Yes.
Okay, so look, we'll get stuck into the Q&A maybe, and again, as Kieran had said, look, if anybody has any questions, please do pop them into the chat function, and we'll get to them. But if I can get the ball rolling, Paul, with you, I suppose from a national and maybe a self-interested Cork perspective, you know, you're flagging the importance of ports there as gateways to unlocking the potential for the blue economy. And I suppose what's becoming apparent to me is the linkage now very much so between green and blue economies. You're seeing developments in offshore wind. We're seeing things like green hydrogen developments being announced here for Cork in the last 10 days or so. Just in terms of us nationally and locally ensuring we harness that potential opportunity, I suppose what needs to happen at a national level to ensure the skills are in place, Paul, make sure we can service those opportunities and fully realize their potential?
That's it, Harry. I mean, our ports have always been hubs for energy. You know, energy in the past, fossil fuels handling, you know, large sort of bulk commodities, coal, oil, and so on. And but our ports of the future will be dealing with these new energy sources, and there are challenges among that. From the ports themselves, you know, the notable differences from high volume, high ship call numbers to what is low volume but very high value components. And I think when we speak to the ports and I suppose the energy sector in general, as we've done through the MarENet project, you know, the handling that high value equipment are skills that are, you know, the ports will need to develop. And I think fortunately in Ireland, through the likes of Doyle Shipping Group, who have a presence in Cork, have a lot of experience in this from their work in Belfast. You know, so we know from speaking to groups like that, you know, there is expertise here nationally in handling this sort of equipment, which I think can serve us well, both through the growth of our local markets. So, you know, we all are aware of the ambitions of offshore wind in Ireland, and our ports, you know, will not be found wanting in developing the capacity and the skills to handle that. But there are huge export opportunities. You know, our ambitions are huge from our perspective, but they're dwarfed by the plans at a European level for offshore energy. So, you know, developing the skills for our ports and our own companies, you know, will provide export opportunities as well. So I think that's you know, these are specialist skills that can be developed for our maritime sector, both nationally, and provide opportunities for export internationally.
Super. Thanks for that, Paul. Ronan, maybe if I can move to you, you know, I have to give great credit to you for making sense of what appears to be an absolute beast of, you know, a policy, an all-encompassing policy and, you know, direction of travel for the EU. I suppose bringing it back to an Irish context and appreciating your points around, there are lots of gaps there yet that need to be filled, and it's early days. you know, a couple of things, you know, from an Irish context, what would you see as the key challenges for us here? And secondly, I suppose, what are the key opportunities that are presenting through the Green Deal for us?
Okay, well, the glass half full, half empty. I suppose we all realize that our climate and biodiversity targets for 2020 were missed by a distance, and 2030 is not shaping up to be any better unless radically corrected. So there's a lot of challenges inherent in that, and we know what they are, I think. We also have a very mixed performance on environmental legislation generally, and are frequently on the naughty step in Europe for failure to comply, which comes with a cost. So I think it brings it. The Green Deal sort of brings a. Sorry, I have a pollinating insect attacking me in the spirit of biodiversity. The Green Deal brings an opportunity for a bit of a culture change, I suppose, if the targets are seen as a means rather than an end towards developing a different type of more resilient, stable climate and economy, sort of a self-made sense of carbon neutrality. And it's probably quite well aligned, I would think, to our needs in terms of promoting not just a sense of putting out fires, but more positivity down the line. And you can see its imprint coming through on the recent the climate bill, which is progressing towards being enacted by the Oireachtas. So all in all, it's going to be a huge part of how we change our climate and our biodiversity trajectory and correct some very long-standing failures. And it'll also bring about better monitoring and reporting and prevention approaches, so a more systemic examination of what we're about.
I suppose maybe as an extension of that slightly before I move on to Sonia with a couple of questions there. Notwithstanding, there seems to be multiple funding tranches to kind of take forward climate action, I suppose, at an EU level. But I was struck by the 30% metric there that has been committed. Now it's a minimum floor level that's committed, obviously, as part of the 7-year budget. But given the scale of ambition being stated, is 30% anywhere near enough in terms of what needs to be done?
No, it does come across as quite low, really. The more I kind of made the point earlier that there's a green tinge to practically everything, and it's like an earmarking or a tagging. So I could see that being revised only upwards, and it would be perfectly rational and normal for budgets to be changed mid-course, just depending on which way the wind is blowing, which is my segue to kind of say that in terms of energy opportunities for Ireland, offshore wind is probably the biggie. I talked about the massive ramping up of the capacity in European terms, and local and national level, we're looking to, I believe, go up to 35 gigs by 2040, taking advantage of the competitive geographical advantage we have there. And the Green Deal will really be a great enabler there, I think, in terms of addressing how investment attractiveness comes into play with declining tech costs. In drawing together the interconnectivity we're going to need, the famous Celtic interconnector to France, plus hopefully something from Wexford to Wales as part of a super grid to distribute and balance variable power modes throughout Europe. But this depends on things like the Marine Planning Development Framework being in place. But then, there are other opportunities, I think, in purely energy terms, particularly, I talked about hydrogen earlier. That's going to be massive to see how that can be, and that can decarbonize gas supply and be injected into the national grid and be used as a transportation fuel. There's even talk of it as an aviation fuel now. But on a more brass tacks level, local community energy generation, there's going to be more of a drive, I think, to as part of efforts to decarbonize the sector, to move away from long distance supply chains to using data-driven distribution for systems that are more reliant on local input, including community-driven approaches which have a community dividend, and that should have cleaner benefits, and it should have energy efficiency benefits as well.
For sure, for sure.
And apart from that, renewable electricity would seem to be this as a vector to drive carbon reduction across other sectors of the economy. There's been a lot of progress in recent years in decarbonizing electricity, and EirGrid have high targets for 2030. I think it's 70% on an all-Ireland basis, with extra capacity above that. And so that's going to depend on the policy signals that will come from the climate bill and onwards to drive investment decisions and give a sense of security. And then you have the RES scheme on renewable electricity support projects as well.
Sure.
And other developments on batteries. So there's a great deal happening on the energy front in particular.
Yeah, a lot of play there for sure. Thanks, Ronan. I suppose, Sonia, maybe moving to yourself then, and it just mirrors one of the questions I had myself. But there's a question here from John, Dr. John Hobbs there. So when you're coordinating applications for the ERI in UCC, is there a need for local companies to get involved? And if so, how can they do so to collaborate with yourselves if their focus is green? So how does Joe Public with his small business here in Cork get involved?
Well, in terms of, for instance, in terms of marine renewables and stuff, we do have lots of engagement with industry because the MarENet Centre is part of the ERI. So that aspect of it is, they do have a lot of engagement with local and national industry in terms of the marine renewables area, marine, and a lot of stuff that they focus on in terms of marine research. I guess if you're interested in collaborating with us, give me a shout and I'll put you in touch with the right, because I do not just European funding, I do national funding as well. Basically, I do every funding. So if there's anything that anyone is interested in, just drop me a line, we'll have a chat. I can bring in Paul Bulger, who's the manager of ERI, and we can put you in, we can make the connection between companies and PIs that might be relevant. We just had a couple of project proposals going in it was an area that we don't usually work in. It was to do with creative arts, but they reached out to Paul and said, we want to do a project that has to do with climate action and arts. And do you have someone that wants to work with us? And we connected people, and I think we had 2 or 3 proposals going in with our academics. So reaching for Paul Bulger, who's the manager.
Your matchmaking, Sonia, essentially, which is great. So yeah, like one other question there, and it's on the same theme from Jose Espina there. Are there brokerage events, or I guess information events planned for the various funding calls that are open? I suppose that's one thing that did come across in your presentation. There are loads of routes for funding, and trying to make sense of all of that can be challenging.
So the 2021 and 2022 Horizon Europe calls are expected to be launched on the 22nd of this month. And then the European Union always does this. There will be a week or 10 days of what they call research and innovation days. And under that, there's a link in the presentation to that. It's the 2021 research and innovation days. And there will be brokerage events for each of the clusters and for each of within those 10 days. So I think what they're doing is each day will be like one day will be the first day is a general introduction to Horizon Europe, then every other day will be focused on a particular cluster or a particular funding stream. And usually what you can do is you register, you put up a little profile of your company, and then you can join. In the pre-COVID times, it was you went and you had 3 slides, you could get up and do 3 slides about your company. Now they do it virtually. There was one in the marine area for Ireland, a national one, maybe a couple of months ago. So there will be national information days as well, probably after the summer.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, folks, look, there are a couple of other questions there, but I'm conscious of time. We've gone quite a few minutes over at this stage, so I think maybe to let everyone get back to their day, we'll wrap up. So look, just thanks very much to our speakers this afternoon, Ronan, Sonia, and Paul, for his introduction as well, for their time, effort and insight on this vast and important topic. Thanks to John Hobbs of MTU and his partners in the MarENet project for delivering this event with us. As ever, thanks to Cork City Council and Cork County Council for their continuing support via the Economic Development Funds. Thanks to all of you for tuning in and engaging with the discussion. If you have any feedback on this event or would like to discuss speaking at a future briefing, don't hesitate to contact us. Finally, a recording of this event will be available at the Energy Cork website. That's www.energycork.ie, and we'll issue an email to let you know when it's up there. Thanks again to all. Really appreciate all your time and the speakers for your effort in pulling together what has been really informative presentations. See you soon.
Okay, bye all.